to Nole Edge, the official podcast of the College of Arts and Sciences at Florida State University. I'm your host, Amy Walden, the Assistant Director of Visual and Social Media with the College of Arts and Sciences, and we're coming to you from GeoSet Studios in Dirac Science Library, which we talked about on our podcast in the last episode. So if you missed it, be sure to give that a listen. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Ken Hanson. He's the Associate Professor with the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at the College of Arts and Sciences, and leads the Hanson Research Group at Florida State. So Ken, thank you so much for joining me today.
Amy, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So before we get into the topic for today's show, Ken, can you tell us how long you've been at FSU and what drew you to Florida State?
So I've been at FSU a little over 9 years now, which is hard to believe. It feels like I just arrived yesterday. But it was one of those things when I was interviewing at various different schools, there's an ambiance to the university and an ambiance to the department that's kind of underappreciated and understated. But it was one of those things FSU is a highly collaborative environment, not just in chemistry, but across departments. But also I do molecular photophysics, which is light-driven chemistry, and this is the go-to place to do that. Like Michael Kasha is an icon in the field, and there's a Kasha building here, which is absolutely amazing. So
yeah.
It was a very easy decision for me.
I think a lot of people are familiar with that spot on campus. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the types of research being conducted with the Hanson Research Group?
I can. What I do is molecular photophysics from photochemistry, which is a fancy way of saying I shine light on molecules. And so anyone that's ever been sunburnt or went in a car that sat out in the sun knows that photons and light have a lot of energy in it, right? And it really depends on what you do with that energy. And so we're very interested in when that photon is absorbed by a molecule, you can use that to generate electricity. You can make and break bonds. You can do chemical reactions. You can even turn it into mechanical force. And so my group is really interested in not just doing those processes, but understanding how to do those, how fast they are, how efficient they are, and can you make them better?
Yeah, you guys are always doing interesting stuff. I see all of your work on Twitter.
It's pretty glowy stuff and colorful things, and we really love what we do.
Exactly. So in addition to your work with the department, you launched a streaming channel called Ask a Scientist Gaming, which has hundreds of followers on Twitch. So can you tell us what that is?
So Ask a Scientist Gaming is basically, we use Twitch as a platform, not just to play video games, but also to talk science. And so what I do is every other Wednesday night, I invite over a guest who are typically professors at Florida State University, and they basically pick their favorite game and they play it while I feed them questions from chat. And so anyone can join, they can submit their questions. The questions range dramatically depending on who's asking them, but the guests are always happy to answer them and have a little nostalgia playing video games.
Excellent. And when did you first get the idea for Ask a Scientist Gaming, and what was kind of your inspiration for starting it?
So when I first arrived at FSU, one of my colleagues, Greg Dudley, told me to show up to First Friday as like just a monthly event. And so for those of you not familiar, First Friday at Railroad Square Park, the first Friday of every month, you can basically show up and there's artists, musicians, there's food trucks, there's all sorts of things, nonprofits and stuff like that. And I went there and I was like, can anyone set up a tent? And I contacted them and they said yes. And so I asked, I want to set up a tent that says Ask a Scientist. And what we're going to do is I'm going to invite 4 or 5 of my colleagues to show up by the tent, drink beer, and talk about science. And that's literally what we did at First Friday. And then COVID hit. And so obviously First Friday fell by the wayside. And so we couldn't do it in person anymore. And so something I was wrestling with for a while is I'm an avid video gamer. I have been for more than 3 decades. I watch a lot of Twitch and video game streaming and stuff like that. But the thing I noticed is on Twitch, it's not the best players necessarily that get the views or have people watching. It's the people that are interesting and have interesting things to say. And my thought was, scientists have interesting things to say, right?
Absolutely.
And so moving to this online medium was really easy. It transferred nicely, and we didn't have to meet in person because of COVID. And so it seemed like a natural progression. One thing I will note is Ask a Scientist is still going on in person at First Friday. David Collins from the physics department is running it now. And so I have the online venue and he has the in-person one.
Excellent. That's great. And I'll admit, I'm one of those people who didn't necessarily understand the concept of video game streaming and watching others play the games until I tuned into some of those streams myself. And I have to say now I get it. It's actually highly entertaining. So what would you say to someone who was like me, who maybe hasn't tuned into something like this before? What can they expect?
Well, the funny part is I have to explain it to every one of my guests, or almost everyone. Very few of my guests know about Twitch or are regular watchers of Twitch. And so it's one of those things. Twitch is this platform where it started out with just video games and streaming video games, and you can watch and listen to the person talk, and you can chat with them in real time. And it has something like 20 million viewers a day. And so this is a huge audience, a huge pool of people that are willing to watch video games. And so for anyone that's interested, you can think of it kind of like a podcast, right? Like an interview. In our case, we have two people talking, and video games are just really the background. It's like visual entertainment behind a podcast. And so that's kind of how we treat it. One thing I will note is that we're not the only science education streamers. There's an entire subcategory of science technology. You have people from, blacksmiths to artists to electrical engineers doing what they do, but doing it on camera while talking with the audience.
Excellent. So speaking of Twitch, how difficult is it for guests to play games while they're answering questions? It sounds complicated to me.
It varies dramatically depending on the guests and their comfort level. Mm-hmm. There's two extremes: people that haven't played games at all in 30 years, and they're like trying to remember how to play while talking, which obviously is a challenging thing. The other extreme we have gamer guests that are very invested in their games, and they'll stop talking because they want to focus on what they're doing in the game. So
they're like, no time for the science right now.
Exactly. But what's fun is, we drink alcohol during that, and it tends to relax, and you have a lot of fun during it.
Yeah, that helps.
It loosens up quite a bit. So
now you've had guests from chemistry, biology, meteorology, psychology, pretty much you name it. They've been on the show. Who has been your most memorable guest or guests on the show? I'm putting you in the hot seat.
Yeah, that's a hard one because you're making me pick my favorite. But I do have favorites, but they're maybe not for reasons you'd think. It's one of the things I really like this is how much I learn from my guests. Like, I'm an expert in a very particular domain, but my guests, they know a completely different area of research. And so when I say my favorite guests, it's really how much can I learn from them. And so while I love my chemistry and physics and biology colleagues, I know quite a bit in those areas, not as much as them, but enough general knowledge. But when you start getting into like social sciences, like psychology and geography and sociology, I really learn a lot from them. Recently, we actually had Julianne Grasso from the College of Music on, and she does music theory as applied to video games. And this is an area that I live in. I play video games all the time, but I don't know how to view that through the lens of an expert. And so it's really fun when I get those people outside my expertise to talk about what they're experts in.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of that episode. She goes, I'm not necessarily a scientist, but I want to take part.
What's underappreciated is that everyone's a scientist.
Exactly.
Everyone looks at the world and says, here's how I think the world works, and I make a decision based on that. And that is a testable hypothesis. So we will take anyone that wants to come on the stream.
Okay, another question for you. Which guest would you say has been the best at video games so far?
Man, we have a couple. Matt Hauer from sociology is pretty good. Rob Lazenby from chemistry. It tends to be the younger faculty that are still actively playing games, and they get to play their own games. But we actually have a tradition now where we end the game with a particular game called, or end the night with a particular game called Narc for the Nintendo. It started out as a joke. Now it's a tradition. We literally time every guest how fast they beat the game. So we have a numerical competition.
That is so fun.
Yes.
Okay, now which video game is your favorite to play?
So ironically, it is the game Narc. So when I was my own guest on the stream, I started playing that one because it was something from my childhood. But it's this really terrible bargain bin game from Blockbuster, that $5 bucket when you exit kind of thing. That's where that game was. But I played it as a kid, and I brought it back when I was the guest on my own stream. And it started out as a joke, and then it became a challenge. And they were like, you should speed run it. And so the idea is to run a video game as fast as you can. And there's leaderboards and there's worldwide competitions to be really fast at video games. And I committed. And for about a year, I was the world record holder in Narc.
Oh my gosh, no way.
So
what a title.
We went all out on it. I got beat fairly recently, about 3 months ago.
No, you got to reclaim your crown.
Exactly. So that's my favorite, but for weird reasons.
That is a great thing to be able to brag about, I must say.
Absolutely.
Now, if someone is interested in submitting questions for the stream, how do they go about doing so?
So we have a Twitter profile. It's Scientist Ask. And if you guys follow us, you'll see I do notifications about upcoming guests as well as the past streams. You can tweet questions to me. If you know the guest that's upcoming, you can email them to me. We also have a Discord channel that you can find on our Twitch channel under About Us and Information. So yeah, if you have questions, as long as you get them to me, they will show up on stream.
Excellent. All right. So we end every podcast with our bowl of random questions. All right. So Ken, please draw a question and read it.
All right. No pressure. Are you an early bird or a night owl? As of having a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old right now, I'm early bird.
Oh, yeah. You kind of have to be in that scenario.
Exactly. That, and I teach class at 8 a.m.
Yeah. Right before you came in today, you said you taught about 300 people.
Yeah. Well, and I also bike into work, and it turns out the safest time to bike is between about 5 and 6 a.m.
So, wow. Yeah, nice. Before even the sun is up, you're already on the way.
Exactly.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. If you want to tune in to any of the Ask a Scientist Gaming live streams, head over to the Ask a Scientist Gaming Twitch, and be sure to follow @ScientistAsk on Twitter so you never miss a stream. And you can catch up on all the previous guests on the Ask a Scientist Gaming YouTube channel. And you can learn more about Ken Hanson and the Hanson Research Group by visiting chem.fsu.edu. That does it for this episode of Nole Edge. Join us again next time.